Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Over the 20 years of this program, we've talked many times about the state of Bronx youth, and particularly Bronx boys and male teens. Unfortunately, by any measure, our young men are in danger. They're dropping out of school at alarming rates, the incarceration numbers are continually high, and their job and achievement outlook is poor. Tonight's program is about a concerted effort to change those conditions. We're going to meet a Bronxite who has formed the AIMHigh Empowerment Institute, which has a number of hands-on, real-life programs to empower young Bronx men to do better for themselves and really for all of us. We're also going to meet a young man who's part of the Institute. He's going to share his remarkable transformation from someone who did not have a future and hope to someone who's very much on track to have a bright future. He's gone from no I can't to yes I can. The phones will not be open tonight. There's some technical issues, so we're going to deal with that at another time. But you can also send us emails at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, and we'll post them on the air during a future edition of our program. You can also send them via Facebook, and if you write something interesting and worthwhile, we certainly would put it out on the air. But for the here and now, from the AIMHigh Empowerment Institute, welcome back to my buddy Sherman Browne. Nice to have you with us, Sherman.
Gary, it's great to be here again.
And he's brought along a fine young man who's a Monroe College freshman, James Reyes. Good evening, James. Nice to have you.
Nice to have you too.
Thank you for joining us. Sherman, let's start with the AIMHigh Empowerment Institute. Now, for folks who don't know, and I said he's my old friend, Sherman and I have been talking about these issues with young men in the Bronx for many years.
Many years.
How did we get to the AIMHigh Empowerment Institute?
Well, over the years, I've continued working with young men in the Bronx, particularly at the Felisa Rincon de Gattier Institute for Law and Public Policy. And, we started off going there, just doing little programs. This was a spin-off of my AIMHigh Insights video series, which provides weekly motivation. But we were focusing on really empowering these young men, recognizing the statistics. There was something that was written by Michelle Alexander, professor at Ohio State University, where she said that there are more people of color on probation, parole, or in prison today than there were slaves in 1850.
Oh my goodness.
And recognizing that fact, we said, look, we have to do something to really deal with the young men of color. We know what the statistics are, and we wanted to take a different approach. So we started working within the high schools, doing just mini forums, but here's the problem. When you go and you speak at these forums, you speak and they hear it, but then 2 days later they go back to the same habits. So we said we needed something that was more stable, something that was more structured, that could carry these young men through a process, and that's how we developed the AIMHigh Empowerment Institute, particularly with that focus.
The follow-up question I was going to ask you to start was, we've talked about this for many years. What has been the problem with all these efforts? Now, you've begun to address that to say, well, there's never follow-up. Are there other issues with these kinds of programs? Because again, this is not the first time we've dealt with this on this show. What have been the issues that have stopped these kinds of programs from being successful?
So here's the thing, Gary. Often we focus, when we focus on our young people, we focus on education. So we tell them, go to school, and when you go to school, you'll get good grades and get a job. But then when they go to school, all they're doing is getting tests. And the young people have a hard time, particularly young men, seeing what is the connection between education and my real life experience. So the AIMHigh Empowerment Institute was particularly designed to bridge the gap between those two. So of course, yes, we want to focus on academics and make sure that these young people are getting good grades. And that's measured by the GPA. But we said, what is the measure for things like confidence, competence, character? Well, we said, let's focus on what we call the CPA, the character point average. And if we could try to bridge the gap between persistence and character and intelligence, bringing those two together will make sure that these young men see that there is a connection between academics and really achieving their goals in life. So we're academically focused, but we're life skills driven as well.
The whole idea of, and we don't want to get into this now, but about education and measuring, how they do, you're using words like confidence and character, and it sounds like you're being able to quantify it. Let's start with the problem. What is the problem of young men in the Bronx developing that character and confidence, and then how are you going to get them to a point that you can actually measure it and say, well, now you're doing better in that way?
Well, absolutely. So here's the issue. Many of our young men in the borough, they look towards what they see in their neighborhoods. right? And if they live in a socioeconomically depressed neighborhood and all they see is crime and that's what they see around them, most of the times what they will do is take the time to mimic that. What our philosophy is that we will not allow your geography to determine your biography. We have to expose you to some other things outside of what you just naturally see in your neighborhood on a day-by-day basis. So the problem is that a lot of these young men don't have exposure, and because of the lack of exposure, we look to rappers and artists and we say, hey, you know what, that's what I want to be, and that's really the quick route, and we don't recognize where the step by step would actually work.
One in 450,000 maybe is going to have a chance to do that. Before we bring James into the conversation, I think this really is a fundamental question, and I've interviewed you and others on this topic for many years, and the question is how to originally engage them. I'm going to be stereotypical here. Here's a young man of color in the Bronx, and he's grown up maybe in a single family home. Maybe the parent has not had a real good opportunity to engage them in extracurricular activities. They may not exist. There may be a number of siblings who distract them. They end up basically getting brought up on the streets. You come by, I come by, others that we've had on the show come by and say, you know what, there's a better way. Go to school, we're going to teach you character. And they say, yeah, I get it. And they don't do it. How have you been able to engage young men, whereas maybe others have not been able to do that? Well, you understand the scenario I painted?
Yes, no, absolutely. So here's the approach that we've taken. We've taken the negative things that people usually focus on, and we said, hey, let's switch this up a little bit. So if rap music is something that's really getting the young people focused, they listen to Bobby Shmurda and all of these different artists, why not use rap, but in a more positive way to really engage them? So what happens is when we walk in to these young men, because we live in these neighborhoods, we know some of the things that they go through, we know the things that they get connected to. Our process is really to connect before we try to correct. And what we do is we use things like music to engage them, and once we catch their attention, we tell them, look, we do music as well. We do these things that you like, that you enjoy, but we found a better way. And we found a more legal way of doing things, you know, where you don't have to revert to just what you see in your neighborhood with crime and everything else. So it's really finding a way to captivate their attention. And often if you just go to a young person and you say, hey, let me tell you, you need to go to school, without first connecting to them, understanding who they are, what are the things that they value and why they value it. If you don't understand those things, you will never connect with them.
Are you able to do it one-on-one, or do you do it in larger groups? Well, I mean, I guess you say you go into high schools, that would suggest larger groups, but again, in those larger groups, you know, you never really get into the truth.
Yeah, so the way that we're able to do it is because we have a hybrid approach. So yes, we have the larger groups that we meet with, but all the young men get connected to what we call empowerment coaches. So we find young men, men who've been successful, and this is really rooted in what Dr. Sean Harper calls the anti-deficit approach. Often we focus on the deficits, all the negative things that's happening. We point out the negative statistics and try to tell the young men, don't become that statistic. Well, what Sean Harper says is that you should really focus.
Sean Harper?
Sean Harper, he's a doctor at, of course, doctor of education at Pennsylvania University. And what happens is he created this anti-deficit achievement framework. And what he said is, look, although we know that those negative statistics are true, why not focus on the things that have worked for the young men who have been successful and put that in front of them?
So, I mean, and I know this because you and I have worked at Monroe College, that they have a male empowerment, and they'll bring men of color, whether it be a judge, a police officer, a professor, a doctor, a lawyer, whoever it is. Yes. And so you use that same method.
Absolutely. So we use that approach, but now it's a more structured mentoring component to it, where these young men could ask for advice and they stay connected with their coaches.
Listen,